Hello, today I have a wonderful guest. It's just fabulous when I meet someone of like mind. And it's just a beautiful thing. It's Nancy Perpall. And she's a lawyer. She's an attorney, except she used to be a nurse. So we're going to get to that story. But she's also an author. And just like me, we love neuroscience. So we're going to talk about all those things today, organically and methodically, to help you understand yourself, because she's legal counsel and I'm a licensed mental health counselor. And we're here to help you understand things that may be going on with you on mental health discovery and recovery. And her book is titled Around Which All Things Bend. So welcome, Nancy.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I
Thank you for
really
having
appreciate
me.
having you here.
Well, I very much appreciate the invite.
So we have talked earlier when we started. Or everybody knows we're talking a little earlier before we start. There's a term I can barely pronounce that has come back into light. Can you tell us that before? Because we're going to talk about that today. I want to give people a little teaser for that to let them know what's coming. Because they'll relate to, I think everyone will relate to this term, and then we'll get into your book and everything else.
The term is anagnosia. Anagnosia. It's a tongue twister. What it is it's not in the DSM, but it is a clinical term to describe when a person who has a mental, not necessarily illness, but a mental problem, whether it be a personality disorder, will it be narcissism, will it be obsessive compulsive, and they refuse to get help. And they say, I'm not the one who's sick, you are. You get help, and our relationship is going to be better. And what that term has now become is a way of identifying people who are resistant to treatment because they truly do not believe that they are the ones who need the treatment. And they don't have to be psychotic. They don't have to have, a reality break. This can be used with anyone with whom you're dealing, where you truly see they have some mental issues going on, whether it be addiction, drug, or alcohol. It's a denial. It is a denial, and it is a true mindset that they have that you can break through with this program called LEAP. And it's a program that I don't know if you want to get into that now or you want to get into it a little
You
later.
can briefly give an overview. That would be great. So
Okay.
because this is discovery and recovery, so it's always good to give the problem, but I'm a solution focused therapist. So if there's a solution, we want to know.
Well, the solution is to, first of all, to learn, to empathize, to agree, and to partner. And it's called LEAP. And basically, there is a psychiatrist, I think he's at Harvard now. Well, he was, I think, in Massachusetts. And he actually has this program called LEAP, if they want to Google it. And it's a way of trying to get the person who is resistant to treatment to at least open up to the possibility. And you don't do it by saying, you're crazy, you need help. You need help. You're out of your mind. You're a narcissistic pig. I mean, name calling is not going to get the person to therapy. But what this particular psychiatrist was recommending is that you basically show the person empathy. First, you have to really learn about what the issue really is, and then empathy. And you have to empathize with them. And you have to say something like, I understand that my asking you to get help is very annoying to you. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry for that. But I love you dearly, and I want us to be better. If it's a relationship issue, if it's a child, that's, you would approach it somewhat differently.
Yes.
But it's all the same. And the whole purpose is to try to become a friend, not an enemy to that person. Because very often when you've been hurt by the person that you feel really needs to get help, you're dealing with a lot of your own resentment and anger and abandonment issues, and you feel detached from them. and you almost feel like punching back, usually verbally. You know, physical violence is a whole different subject. I mean, that's just not tolerated.
Not
But this is
tolerated, zero
not
tolerance.
tolerated. This is just a situation where the person mentally is refusing to get treatment. You want to help them, whether it be a child or a spouse or a friend. And the whole key is to empathize, agree with them, say, yes, treatment is really a pain in the rear end.
Mhm.
It's time, money. You know, you have to open yourself up to issues that you may not want to look at, and then you have to partner with them. And by that, they mean you have to basically tell the person that you're willing also to get some sort of help to help them get treatment. And
Yes.
that's the partnering aspect of it.
Oh, thank you so much. I think I just can feel somebody out there being touched by that, because there are so many people. You mentioned it, to the narcissistic abuse. That is, when you were talking about that, I said that this is, the DSM does call it with insight, with little or no insight. These are little like add-ons we can add when we make a diagnosis from the DSM, which is really a diagnostic and insurance code manual.
Right.
But when you use it in that way, with or without insight, that without insight, that's really tough to treat. And personality disorders often have that happen. So you're telling to people to come from it from a point of empathy instead of accusatory, and not be punitive or not be corrective, but protective. Okay.
Exactly.
Yes.
You,
So
you,
that's beautiful. And
you
your
have
book,
that summed up perfectly.
your book, I love that you, some of the things in your blog that I've read rhyme. Well, we might get to Cupid can make you feel stupid. I love that, because I used to be a songwriter, and I love anything that rhymes. It helps people remember. So your book is titled Around Which All Things Bend, and it was just published. Who's your publisher?
Archway. It's a imprint of Simon and Schuster, but it's a hybrid. It's not. It's a non. I didn't go traditionally because of my age and because it's really across a genre. I mean, a debut novelist at my age. Good luck with that.
Oh
There,
no, I love it.
oh, well, you may, but publishing
You
companies
bend.
that, you know,
So
publishing industry, you've got to almost be an influencer and have a huge author platform for them to really even back you in a book,
yes,
especially a debut author.
it
But in any
is.
event, I'm sorry.
It is. It's difficult, but I'm glad you did the hybrid, because that, you know, we have books like you know, all the memoirs, the Hillbilly Elegy, all these things. So
Uh-huh.
so we're going to get into your book in a minute, but also, speaking of memoirs, I'd like you to give your memoir of how you went from being a nurse to an attorney. What you it's I we've got to hear that story.
Well, it's actually not that complicated. I wrote a textbook with some people from the University of Pennsylvania. I was living and practicing nursing in Pennsylvania at the time. And it was called Advanced Concepts in Clinical Nursing. It was published in 1973. And it was adopted by many nursing schools throughout the United States. It was published by J.B. Lippincott, a textbook company.
Oh, I know who that is. Yeah.
Of course, and very well recognized, well respected textbook company. And a lot of the hospitals were adopting the procedures that we had recommended. I was a critical care nurse, which means that I was certified to work in the emergency room or intensive care. And there are two different skill sets, one for intensive care, one for the emergency room. There's some crossover, but they're really two different skill sets. In any event, I would be pulled from one to the other depending upon the census or the need. And I went to the hospital administration in the hospital that I was working at and explained some of the procedures that I really felt we could start to employ in both the emergency room and intensive care to get a better patient outcome. And basically, I was told I'm a nurse, and nurses don't make policy. Nurses don't make procedure. The doctors do. Now, this was in 1973.
Oh yeah,
That's
shut up and
not the
put up.
same. Yeah.
It's not the same
No,
now.
it's not the
My
same.
dad was a doctor. It is different. Thank you, medical.
Yes.
Profession.
But, when I was a nurse, doctors were like demigods,
Mhm.
you didn't question them. They were,
Yes.
omniscient. But in any event, so the hospital had just hired an attorney who had been a nurse. And she was hired to look at the different departments and, ferret out any possibilities of malpractice. And so I went to her. She was eating in the cafeteria. I approached her and I said, I wrote this book with some people from University of Pennsylvania. Many of the hospitals are adopting procedures and protocols, and the administration basically won't listen. And they say, since I'm just a nurse and I'm not a doctor, what do you recommend? How can I think it would be helpful for you to look at some of these procedures yourself. She looked up in between bites and she said, become a lawyer, you'll have power.
Good for her. You had a mentor.
Yeah, well, what happened was not so much when you're just a new graduate law student,
Yes.
lawyer. The firm that I went with did defense malpractice, which is what I was hired to do.
Oh, that's tough.
But the first day on the job, there were 75 divorce files on my desk. And I went to the senior partner and I said, sir, I was hired to do defense malpractice. I am not interested in doing divorce. And he leaned across his desk and he put his finger an inch from my nose and said, you're not going to make it here. You do what we tell you to do. And divorce work is for women. Women can do
Wow.
divorce work. So in any event, I was getting divorced myself at the time. I had two kids, and I really needed the job. In any event, I worked very hard to do the divorce work at the same time I was doing jury trials, defending, physicians who had been sued for malpractice. And 6 years later, my divorce practice was thriving, and the law firm I worked for lost the contract to represent the physicians because the insurance company contracts with the law firm. The doctors don't pick who is going to represent them. The insurance company does. In any event, they lost that big chunk of profit from doing defense malpractice, and I had my stable of divorce clients. So I left the firm and started my own firm.
I
And
love
became,
retribution stories and
oh,
reclamation stories. That's
well,
some people may call it karma, call it whatever you want, but or what goes around comes around. Yeah.
well, you
A
have no
beautiful
idea
story.
how true that is, because about 15 years later, maybe 15, maybe 20 years later, his son's wife came to me for the divorce. And the senior partner who told me I wasn't going to make it there, he had backed his son in this business. I don't want to say what business it is because,
Right. Yeah, you can. Yep.
confidentiality. But he had given him a great deal of money. And this young man did not require a prenuptial agreement. So I ended up getting half of everything that the senior partner had given to his son. And boy, was he angry.
Oh, well, things work out. And I really want people to hear that if you just kind of get out of the way and quit fretting and using a lot of negative energy, sometimes if you just barrel forward and you start looking at where you are instead of where you've been, or how far you've come instead of how far you need to go, these kinds of things happen. I mean, there's just synchronicity to it. There's neuroscience behind it. And we're going to get into that now, because I read something from your bio that I absolutely love, because I do write nonfiction. So I really get it. I try to make it very palatable when I write self-help books. And I'm also distributed by Simon and Schuster. It's a great company. But let's see, here it was. Nancy learned that most people would rather chew cut glass than read relationship advice presented through research and statistics. Amen. I agree. And that she hopes her novel will educate, entertain, and inspire readers to poke holes in the wall they may have erected around themselves and discover the love waiting for them on the other side. I love that from your website. Could you give how to get in touch with you on your website so people will know?
Yes, absolutely. My website is nancyperpall.com, and it's NANCY P as in Peter, ER, P as in Peter, ALL. And as you said, there are a lot of, I think, very, very good blogs on there. I'm getting tremendous feedback from them. In fact, there's a series of 5 blogs that discuss the malnourished marriage and the 5 essential nutrients for a healthy relationship, which is going to become a book. Actually, I wrote the book, but I have to rewrite it, edit and edit and edit. And you, as a former songwriter, know what that means. It's edit, 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 and until it's perfect. So it'll be out in 2023. But around which all things bend is really, it's a love message to people about love. And love is the thing around which we bend ourselves, and we bend ourselves to give it and to get it. And at some time, inevitably, even during happy relationships, there are ebbs and flows. And you get to the point where the emotional energy, you feel as if the emotional energy that you have to put into the relationship is going to break you. And that's what it's about. How far will you bend until you break? And we all have a breaking point, no matter how much we may love someone.
Yes.
Things happen in a relationship, little resentments start. And I know that you're familiar with the John Gottman research.
Oh, absolutely.
And,
horsemen of the, I'm going to pause right there. Anybody who has not heard of that, there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse of a marriage. John Gottman, Gottman, because that will really help people. I'll probably do a short YouTube video on that, because that is, so what Nancy Perpall is saying right here is she's studying cutting edge, state of the art people, past, present, and future of marriage and neuroscience behind it. So continue, because people need to know about this. What they do,
well,
they do bend and twist themselves, especially if you're in love with someone with a personality disorder.
Well, you alluded to it in the beginning with the novel. I mean, when you were mentioning agognosia, it's in the book, it's in the novel. I really lay out a lot of neuroscience that I've learned throughout the years, having been a nurse and then having an interest in that forever, and constantly researching and even researching. I've represented people with personality disorders in the divorce. That's what's caused the problem with the marriage. Try to get them to agree on a settlement when they have something in their head about, no, I shouldn't have to share this pension. Well, I'm sorry about that, but it's marital property. Well, no one told me that. Well, you should have gone to, you should have.
Ignorance is no excuse for the law.
Yeah, exactly. But in any event, I lay out the emotional impact on a child, and the child in the book is the ex-fiance of the protagonist. The protagonist comes back from having been in combat in Afghanistan. He's discharged. He's going to inherit this vast ranch in Montana, and he's an only child. His father is deceased, and he lives, in a wing of this massive mansion with his mother. He gets engaged because his mother's on him about grandchildren and heirs to inherit the fortune that his great-great-great-grandfather found, in Montana. It was a gold mining and silver mining state when it was a territory. In any event, the woman he becomes engaged in is raised by a woman, a mother, who kept this girl, Gwen, away from her father and cut the father out of her life. And I explain in the novel what happens to the personality of a woman who's not had a good relationship with her father. You can't really have a good relationship with an adult male unless you've had a good relationship with your father.
So true.
And
or your mother.
Or your mother,
Your
exactly.
nurturers are who you reenact to the negative. If it's negative, you reenact to the positive. If you had positive, these are attachment styles. And I talk a lot about that and other things, but yeah, people need to realize you need to find out, am I in a marriage? Am I in love, or am I in a trauma bond? Right? You have to find out these things. Yeah, it
Well,
feels like love, but it might be reenactment of something negative, trying to resolve, to gain mastery over something in your adult life that you couldn't in your childhood. So continue, because I want to just hammer these things home, because this is why a lot of people say, Mary, you interview attorneys and you have mental health. They say, oh no, attorneys work with this all the time. All attorneys have a DSM, which is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, on their shelves. You need it to do what you do. I'm counselor, but you're legal counsel, and that's what they call you. So explain this about how children get used, and all these intricate overlays of personalities in divorces.
well, children are the pawns in many, many marriages. I frankly think it's getting much better, because I think the parenting right now in the average marriage, the new millennial marriage is more, it's not necessarily a gender determined parenting role. When I had my children, I definitely, you're the mother, you're the one, I go to work, I make the money, and you take care of the kids. In those situations, and I hope I didn't do it in mine. I don't think I did, because I saw what was happening with these kids. But many, many times women would come in and say, I don't care about the money, I just want the kids. And I don't want him to have much visitation. And that's the kiss of, I can't represent people who have that mindset.
That's a
And
codependent mindset. That's a very codependent mindset.
I would tell these women, mostly it was women, because they were the ones who were the mothers. They were, that was their whole life. That's their identity. And I don't blame them. Don't misunderstand. I had great empathy for the fact that that's how they felt.
And they were afraid. They might be being abused. Yeah.
Exactly. And it was very hard. I can tell you, it was very, very hard to convince some people that this is not the best for your child. If you want your child to be healthy, like it or not, they have to have a relationship with their father, or sometimes the man wanted to keep the child away from the mother because she had cheated on him. That was the big one. So she cheated on him, so therefore she was, the devil. She should not have she should not have these children. But in any event, so it was that's why I became very, very interested in learning how to deal with people who really were resistant, and resistant to getting help. I told 75% of my clients that they needed counseling. And probably
most people going through a
75% of them
divorce
went.
do. It's just so everyone hears this, because I am a family court mediator. I'm doing much, but but as a mental health counselor, I can tell you, I talk to a lot of people going through divorces. It's a grief process. It is not a divorce. It's grieving, but it's exponential because that person is still alive. There's no finality to it. Not that there's finality to someone passing away, but there is finality, at least in the fact that you can accept that they're not still alive on the planet. It doesn't torment you that they might come back, or that, whether that's good or bad. People are scared they'll come back because it's bad. People are scared they'll come back because they want them back and can't get them back. And you had mentioned that I think the audience that I have would love to hear how you represented personality disordered people, because to get them to agree, you have to go through mental aerobics and calisthenics. And even sometimes it doesn't work, but your approach, I'd love to hear that, because it probably is in what your book is about. So if you could kind of put those together for us, that would be good.
I'd love to. I think my success in terms of doing divorce work, and I was extremely successful, was because of my nursing background. When I went to nursing school, we had to have a nursing care plan. You had to, whether you wrote it down or not, you had to have it in your mind. What was the person's, illness? What were the symptoms of the illness? What were the signs? There's a difference between sign and symptom.
Yes.
And you had to figure out how you were going to help this person. And that's how I approached my divorce clients. I probably took what is now called holistic. I didn't realize that it was holistic at the time, but I
No.
took a holistic approach to my clients. I didn't just help them because I was churning a file. I don't think I ever got accused by a client. I got accused by I got accused at everything from opposing counsel. Let me tell you,
That's their job.
every
Isn't it their
negative
job to
out there.
discredit? That's their
I
job to
was,
discredit you. I
yeah, totally wanted to discredit me, undermine me with my clients.
Yes.
It never worked. I was never terminated by a client. I terminated several clients, but
It happens.
never terminated. In any event, what I learned was basically what I was talking about with the LEAP program. I showed them a lot of empathy, that I understood the disappointment, the frustration, the resentment, and the anger. I understood that. I went through my own divorce, so I really understood how heart-wrenching this whole process can be. But I also understood that, and at the time that I first started doing divorce, I was representing mostly women who were dependent. So they needed the money. I mean,
Yes.
if you were going to ruin your husband's career, which was always the big thing, you know,
Yes.
if 9 times out of 10, it was because he went off the rails, he had an affair or a fling or a massage with a happy ending or whatever it was, he was the horrible person.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to ruin their career. Well, if you ruin their
That's
career,
where their alimony comes from.
I'm not going to be able to get any money from you.
Right. It's like, that's where the money's going to come from.
Yeah, where is their money going to come from? And even if they impute an earning capacity to this person because of their bad behavior, you can't get blood out of a stone.
No,
So
and yeah, and it just I'm going to sum this up really fast. Don't be destructive, be constructive in your divorce. Go ahead.
well, that's what I used to
Yeah.
say. My motto was, don't be bitter, be better.
Be better.
And
Yes.
I would
Beautiful.
say, look, you know, bitterness is going to give you wrinkles.
Mhm.
You know, it's going to make you look older.
Mhm.
You're not going to feel good about yourself. All it's going to do is keep up the cortisol level in
Yes.
your body,
Makes you
which
heavy.
is going to help you become obese. I
Mhm.
mean, nothing, diabetes, high blood pressure. I
Yes.
mean, all that cortisol coursing through your body and the epinephrine is not a good thing for you. And they accepted it because they knew I had been a nurse. And I really tried very, very hard to help my clients get mental help, because most of them frankly needed it. You know,
Yes.
a divorce, it takes two people. I mean, you know, I think the biggest problem, and I'm writing this in my present book, and I'm sure you're going to agree, is communication
Oh,
in a
yes.
marriage. That's, if
Absolutely.
people could learn how to communicate in a marriage and a relationship or at work or wherever,
Yes.
and those communication skills are learned in the nuclear family.
Yes.
They're learned as you grow up. And you, as a therapist, can probably speak to this better than I, because you're the expert. But your family of origin is the one who is going to teach you how to do conflict resolution.
Yes.
It's going to teach you
Or how not to do it.
and how not to do it.
Yes.
And it's going to teach you your style of resolving an argument.
Mhm.
When you're going to have a dispute in your marriage. There's no question.
Yes.
Every marriage there are disputes. And usually there's one dispute that it never gets resolved. It comes up over and over.
Usually the reenacted one from the family of origin.
And that's what it's all about. So if you don't open yourself up to exploring how to be a better communicator, you're going to have the same problem in your next relationship. And I represented people in their second divorce and their third divorce. And I would say, you know, you really need to take a step back, ask hard questions before you get married. learn how to communicate, learn how to fight fair. And it's not what you fight about, it's how you fight.
It is.
As a therapist, you probably, I mean, we're speaking from the same hymnal, but
Exactly.
I'd love for you to jump in here, because not only the Gottman Institute,
Mhm.
but Helen Fisher, almost every
Of
researcher
Helen
who's
Fisher.
researching relationships will tell you it's not what you fight about, it's how you fight.
Well, now you've just mentioned Helen Fisher, who I just adore her. She's an anthropologist, everyone. She's not a psychologist. She's not a therapist. And most of her research, she worked at Rutgers University. You can find her on YouTube. Her books are great. Why We Love, How We Love. She's amazing. And because she's an anthropologist, she studied all kinds of love. And her work is so clinical and so wonderful. Most of the algorithms that she discovered are what they use on dating websites. I think those have become corrupted over the years, because when you were speaking, I went, oh my gosh, you just unleashed something in my brain. There is the family of origin factor, but we also have what Carl Jung used to call a collective consciousness. And our collective consciousness has given up the art of diplomacy. We're watching it globally, locally, and in marriages. The art of diplomacy and civility. George Washington wrote this beautiful little book, and I have it somewhere in this house. I think it's called the the Acts of Civility, or it's the Laws of Civility. It's so tiny. I bought it at Mount Vernon. It's a little tiny book, but I said, oh my goodness, if people would just go back and get this 20-page book and just do what it says. It's not about just being nice, it's about being sincere. The collective consciousness is not diplomatic. And the Gottman Institute, to meld all these together that we've been talking about holistically and organically today, the Gottman, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and I don't think they would mind me sharing it, they would probably appreciate it, both of us doing it. We didn't get permission, but I don't think we'll get sued for this. But the reasons that you will most likely get a divorce, other than money, which is what we hear a lot of, is defensiveness, stonewalling, which is the silent treatment, contempt, and that's horrible. So there's one more. There's contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling,
I think it's ridicule.
criticism.
Yeah.
So when you criticize, you can do it with civility. Again, be protective instead of corrective. Instead of saying you're such a narcissistic jerk, you can say, wow, this is not who you are, or this is not the marriage I imagine. Let's try to work on this. And that, do you see how just one is explosive and one is, kind of calming? So if you could talk about that, and how because you said you're working on something new, so we'd love to hear about that too, if you want to. I know sometimes people
No,
don't
I'd be happy to. I mean, I accept these invitations to do podcasts, and I've done about 15 of them in the last 6 weeks, is because I spent 32 years, or almost actually probably 34 years, taking apart marriages. And I am retired now, and my life's mission is to try to keep marriages together.
Oh, beautiful.
Not, yeah, I want people to ask the hard questions before they get married.
Mm-hmm.
I want people to understand the person they're really marrying.
Yes.
Today, so many young people are in love with love
Yes.
because of the Instagram photos and the wonderful dress and the party, and everything is glamorous. And it's the Disneyfication of marriages.
Yes.
And that's what we call it now, Disneyfication of marriages.
And they lived happily ever after, and that is but just the beginning.
But have you ever seen a Disney movie that says what
Yes.
happens after happily ever after
No,
happens?
I want to see a movie that says what happens what happens heavily after. Whatever I'm
No.
trying to say it. It's hard. It's a mouthful.
I think what
Yes.
happens is
That's
where
not,
you
they make that the end, and it really is the beginning, is that
it
marriage is the beginning. I
absolutely
want to see
is.
Cinderella 30 years from now. Yeah.
She's
When-
probably divorced,
Probably.
living out of a pumpkin.
Right.
But
I love something you said in one of your blogs. I tell you, your blogs are great. You had addressed marriage, just what we're talking about now, and we'll talk about the malnourished marriage, because this segues right into it. I just did not want to miss this point with people, because we both have a sense of humor here. But you said when you help clients in marriages, they're not sure if they want to get a divorce, or, they're going through a turmoil, they're doubting themselves, which if you have a lot of self-doubt, you might be being narcissistically abused. I'm just going to throw that in there as an aside.
Mhm.
But you tell them, well, you can stay in this marriage and eat hamburger, be like going to McDonald's and slamming on the counter and
That's
saying,
right.
I want a steak.
That's
But you
right.
have to be willing to accept the fact you're never going to get steak out of this marriage. If you want steak, don't stay in this marriage. If you want to eat hamburger the rest of your life, be my guest. So I love that you put that in there. I think that's great. And I also think you being a nurse has just given you a thread of empathy that you don't usually see in a lot of attorneys, that because you're witnessing in those hospital rooms all those family dynamics. When people come to visit, you can tell if that family's getting along or not. You
Oh,
can tell.
without a question of a doubt. And, I think some of the things that I've shared with my clients is that when I worked in the emergency room, this young mother came in, her husband was killed in an automobile accident.
Mm.
And she came in and she was so distraught because they hadn't kissed goodbye. That they always kiss goodbye, but that
Oh,
morning they had some sort of a tiff, and he left and he slammed the door, and that's all she could think about
oh,
was
oh.
that she missed the opportunity to kiss him. And I mean,
Everyone take note right there. Don't miss the opportunity.
don't miss the opportunity.
It may be the
If you're
last time you see
feeling
them.
like you love this person,
Mhm.
tell them.
Yes.
I mean, if they've hurt your feelings, look,
Tell them.
tell them
Yeah.
and say, look, you really hurt my feelings with that, but I love you and I want
Yes.
to be with you
Yes.
and I want our relationship to be healthy and
Yes.
meaningful for both of us. So what can we do?
Yes.
Now, in this new book, what I do is I use the metaphor of food to get people to discuss the hard issues. Everyone comes together for food, and
They do.
everybody, we learn through metaphor. When we're children, we learn through metaphor. As adults, we learn through metaphor. And this is a metaphor. I compare food. For example, there are 5 elements in it the nutrients that I discuss. The first is communication. Communication is water. We
Yes.
can only live 3 days without water. A relationship cannot survive without water. Water meaning communication.
Yes.
So if you really are struggling to talk to your spouse or the person you're living with or a loved one, even a parent, and they have some notion of this concept, you can say, instead of saying, hey, look, we really need to talk. And let's face it, talk is the enemy for most men. When you say, I want to talk,
They
they go,
hate
oh
it.
my God, what can I do? Is
It's
there
right up
something,
there with
can I
Valentine's
take the
Day for
garbage
me.
out? I mean, does something need to be repaired? I mean, talk? No.
No.
I mean, they practically shake. But in
In
any
your
event,
words, they'd rather chew cut glass.
yeah, they would. But if you say, I feel like we're dehydrated, I mean, and that's,
Yes.
I give these little,
That's diplomacy.
yeah, I mean, dehydrated, what are you talking about? Well, I was reading this book and it says communication is like water. And if you're not getting enough water, i.e. communication in a marriage, you start to feel dehydrated.
And
And
our
that's how
marriage
I
is a little
feel.
dry. And our marriage is a little dry. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, there are things that you can say and there are things that you can do.
Mhm.
There's a book out by a psychologist, you probably know it. It's not new. It's Talk to Me as If You Love Me.
Yes. Yes.
And I sort of, I don't plagiarize it, but I sort of agree with that. And I've said that to my clients over the years. You have to talk to the person as if you love them,
Mhm.
and you have to talk to your spouse who is, whatever issue that you're having in your marriage, whether it's lack of sex. I compare sex to protein. Protein is the building block of the body, and sex is the building block of a relationship.
Yes.
I was on a podcast recently, and I won't tell you the name of the podcast. I wasn't allowed to say sex.
Oh, wow.
And I was invited to talk about marriage and parenting.
How do
So
you do that?
how do you do that?
Well, I
Um,
don't know.
well, I spent an hour without sex coming out of.
Reminds me of I Love Lucy, where they had two separate beds, you know, like, okay, they're
Yeah,
married, but they sleep in two separate twin
immaculate
beds.
conception, right?
I know,
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, whatever.
Somehow they have little Ricky.
Yeah, that was an interesting discussion. But you
Interesting.
know, as you and I are both devotees of Helen Fisher, she talks about the 3 stages of romantic and then
Yes.
long-term relationships. And the first stage is really motivated by a sexual pairing up.
Yes.
You
And
know?
a lot of chemistry.
Yeah, dopamine.
Norepinephrine, dopamine, oxytocin.
Dopamine.
Basically,
Dopamine is pumping and pumping and pumping.
Yeah.
And your audience, if they listen to you, probably have already heard you talk about the fact that dopamine stimulates the same area of the brain that cocaine stimulates.
Yes.
And you get a high.
Yes, you get high. And you
You
can't
know,
eat and you can't sleep, just like cocaine. You get thinner, you can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't think.
Right.
Exactly.
And I talked a few moments ago about the fact that I represented somebody, in three divorces.
Mhm.
He loved the chase, he loved the
Yeah.
chase. He was a dopamine addict.
Yeah.
He had to, the falling in love and the chase and getting this person.
Falling in love. They
Yeah.
fall in love. There's a
Yeah.
reason they call it falling in love.
But I mean,
And so Helen Fisher's next. So there's falling, and then her
the
next
next one is, where the serotonin kicks in, and it's the intimacy.
stability.
It's the intimacy, the calming.
Yes.
That's a calming hormone. And then, of course, oxytocin is
Yes.
the bonding.
Which is the
And-
trust hormone, everyone. That's the trust hormone.
That's the trust hormone.
And when you have sex, even if you don't know that person, it releases oxytocin. So that's why it's not a moral issue for therapists to tell you don't sleep with someone on the first date. It's a chemical issue because you're releasing oxytocin, and you might trust someone who's not trustworthy, and you haven't given it time to find out yet. So
Right. That's
Yeah.
exactly what, that's exactly what she says. But, in this research that I've done a tremendous amount of research, in writing this book. And I also did a tremendous amount in the novel. But, we are so chemically motivated, our behavior, our
oh
moods,
yes.
and our emotions are so dependent on the dopamine, the epinephrine, the cortisol,
Mhm.
the oxytocin. And dopamine is that really bonding, oxytocin is bonding, but dopamine bonds on a different, it makes you more
Yes.
exciting. It makes you
It's
more
excitement.
alluring. And if you do novel things, that stimulates dopamine.
Yes.
So if your marriage is in a stall situation, you need to do novel things.
Exactly.
Go to a different restaurant.
Go to Italy. Whatever.
Go to Italy. Well, you can afford to go to Italy.
That's my answer for everything.
Yeah, well, trust
Just-
me.
I know.
I've been to Italy many times, and I just am in love with Italy.
If you can afford it, it's fine.
Yeah, no,
It's a romantic place. I'm just trying to inject some
Yeah,
and
no, I
people go,
mean-
oh yeah, or save up and do it. Whatever Italy is for you. It might be California, it might be the Keys,
Charleston,
whatever it
South
is.
Carolina.
Exactly. Might
Charleston,
be.
South Carolina is about as romantic as Paris.
Yes, I live not
And-
too far from Savannah. So when I really need a dopamine fix and I need to feel like I'm in Europe and I can't afford it, which I sure can't by any means all the time, like Savannah's right there. It looks just like Europe. Your
Right.
brain doesn't know the difference.
Savannah is fabulous.
Yeah.
But
And
the point-
so tell people the novelty and why that's so important to keep it in marriage, to keep it from failing.
It does. It keeps you interested in, it keeps you interested in your spouse. It keeps you interested in what they're interested in. It's fun. And
Yeah,
who
to keep
doesn't
it
want to have
fun.
fun? I mean, we all
To
want to
keep
have
it
fun.
fun. Well, I'm going to throw something out there to you. I'm going to divulge how I do marriage counseling in two simple ways, and then I want to hear how you did it in legal counsel, so that we can kind of help people. We're going to put our two schools of philosophy together and let people, because I always say people are smarter than we give them credit for. I want people to
Oh,
hear
yeah.
these two schools of thought,
Mhm.
because they're probably very similar, and there's a lot of neuroscience behind what both of us are saying. So when I have a marriage that's just merely in trouble, at the end of the session, I've had all the dumping, all of the venting. I do not separate them ever, because then I become the he said, she said.
Exactly.
We don't think you're talking about you. We're talking about you. I
Mhm.
don't believe in that. I wasn't taught that model. But at the end of every session, I implement the compliment. I have them pay 3 compliments to one another. When that fails, because that's going to release dopamine, it's going to remind them, oh gosh, that we do have this in common. When that fails, and sometimes it fails, I always say most people, nobody wants a divorce, but some people need it. Then I'll implement something that seems very cruel, but I'm trying to find that proof of life in there. I asked them to envision the 2 tombstones, with each spouse's name on it, and how do they feel? And I have them shut their eyes to do it. I'm using guided imagery. And when they, see the tombstone, see your spouse's name, see the date today as today, and you're standing in front of it. And how does that make you feel? Now, some people have said, just like you've released clients before, some people have said, I'd be so relieved. Rarely does anyone say that, mind you. But then I'm like, oh, well, you don't want a divorce, you need one. So speak to how you've used neuroscience in your practice when, the kind of in trouble, and then when all else fails. Describe that to somebody who's out there suffering, saying, I'm divorcing a narcissist, or I'm divorcing someone who doesn't want to let me go. I'm divorcing somebody who I just don't love anymore. I didn't love them to begin with. Help these. How do you handle the in trouble and then the when all else fails marriage?
Well, I think the in trouble marriage, many people, when they are having significant issues in their marriage, some people go to their priest or their pastor
Mhm.
or their mother or some friend or relative. Others go to a divorce attorney. Those are the ones I saw. And they really wanted to find out, what the divorce was going to mean, what
Mhm.
the chances of them would have with custody. And they were very much on the fence because they didn't really want a divorce, but they felt at their wits' end. As I said, each of us has a breaking point,
Yes.
and they feel as if they've bent and bent and bent and turned themselves into a pretzel to try to get this person to reciprocate the love that they're giving. And if it's not coming from that other side, you break. And so many times I've said to clients who are like that, maybe you don't need a divorce, maybe you need a diversion. Maybe what you need is to discover something new about each other.
Yes.
If your heart really isn't in this divorce, you're not going to do well after the divorce.
Yes.
You have to be really committed that you need the divorce to be healthy. But if you're still thinking about, well, I'm not sure, or I could always read their body
Mhm.
language.
Yes.
Excuse me, I went to nursing
Neuroscience.
school
Yeah, and
when
neuroscience.
we
You
didn't
see it.
have computers to tell you if the
Right.
patient was
And
still
and
alive. We
people
actually had
right, had
to
to read
look
it.
at the patient.
And
But in
we have
a
mirror neurons. We are constantly, even if you know nothing about body language, trust your intuition with mirror neurons, and you can Google it. Mirror neurons. We mirror one another. We project, we reflect, and gets back. So the marriage and the triage situation, the really crucial one. How do you facilitate them? The new term is conscious uncoupling, which is just a fancy word for diplomatic divorce. So how do
Well,
you
in a
facilitate
diplomatic
that?
divorce, and I will give kudos to a lot of the millennials now are getting prenuptial agreements.
Yes, I
A
believe in them too. I
huge,
do.
huge uptick. It's 31%. The American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers did a survey, and the divorce attorneys who responded, I think there were 15,000, I think, said that there's a 31% increase in prenuptial agreements among millennials. And I think when you are thinking about getting married, it's essential to find out what the debt of the other person that you're marrying
Yes.
is coming to the marriage with.
Yes.
Find out before you get married, not after you get married.
Yes.
So many people are coming, the average American who's graduated from college has $30,000 in school loans.
Hmm.
And if that's not wiped out by some, governmental edict,
Right.
you're coming with the 30 grand, and the average is between $5,000 and $10,000 in credit card. So
Hmm.
you're starting $40,000 in the hole. Does that person know that?
Yeah, and money is the number one reason for divorce, usually. Money infidelity, statistically, this is really scary, but statistically, money infidelity in a marriage is a precursor to divorce more than sexual infidelity
Oh, that's the new
because
thing.
it leaves people completely devastated. Just like I talked about the tombstone thing, it's like some of the people, when they say I would be devastated, it was because they had no income, no place to go. They would, by a divorce, they would become homeless. The abuse of power, and prenups get a bad name. So in defense of it, for those of you who just prickled when we talked about prenups, it's not about not loving the person, it's loving them enough to make them secure and safe. Prenups are not like just there's some rich person and some poor person in an imbalance of power. It's helping each other through the years. I mean, you can write in chronological prenups, and you know more about that than I do as a divorce attorney, but these can be written in with steps and increments and provisions that are very fair and equitable. I don't like to use the word fair, but they're equitable. But because life really isn't fair. So
No,
and so talk about the neuroscience of a prenup. I think people need to understand it makes you actually safer unless you are in an undue influence situation. I will say there are those out there and you would protect people from those. But
well,
describe how that can make people feel safer.
yeah, as you said, prenups have gotten a really bad rap. So many people think that they cause divorce. That myth has been debunked years and years. Every year, there's a new study that says they do not cause a divorce. And some people, as you just said, the word prickle, prenup makes them prickle, their skin prickle. Excuse me. But what I say is that you're not untying the knot before you get married. You're making sure that the knot doesn't fray while you're married. And
Huge.
it's laying out from both of you what the expectations will be in a marriage. And as you said, money is a big problem. And financial infidelity is a huge problem. And if you don't know where you're starting from, you won't know that you've been hoodwinked, and there's been fraud committed
Correct.
unless you know where your starting line is.
Exactly. And know the laws in your state because gee whiz, in a state that I went to school in, I don't know if it's still that way, in Tennessee. And, it was, like I said, I have not looked at the law books in probably 20 years in Tennessee. But in the old days, if a woman left an abusive marriage and she left her marital home and she stayed away for over 6 months and the spouse could prove it, she forfeited her home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that you've got to know sometimes you need to seek. I always tell people you might need to go seek an attorney to see what can happen to you in a divorce. It kind of helps them mentally. I actually refer many clients to divorce attorneys, not because they want to divorce that day, but to see what's going to happen to you. So you're making a decision to divorce someone, but you need to find out what's going to happen to you financially. The attorneys know forensic accountants. Sometimes this is the first time they've ever heard that. And I always tell them I have an invisible attorney standing next to me that says I can't give legal advice, but I can advise you to go to one to see if you need one, because it will help them settle down if they know what they're up against and what they're not up against. Like you said, she cheated on me, I'm going to take the kids. Doesn't work that way. You can't just do
No,
that to somebody.
absolutely. And the reason why I introduced the issue of the prenup was because when you asked me, what I do when people are not sure about
Yes.
whether they should get divorced or not, I say, let's look at what your life is going to be like, and let's look at what the options are.
Mhm.
Here's one option. If you want to go forward with a divorce, I can tell you within $10,000, probably given all my years of experience and knowledge of the law, what's going to happen to you financially.
Mhm.
And from an emotional perspective, it's going to be up to you if you're all in and you're willing to take that on, or do you think maybe there's some possibility that your husband or wife, depending upon who I'm speaking to, wants to know that this is going to be happening. You know, if we don't change, inevitably we're going to get a divorce. And I've consulted an attorney, and here's what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Now, do you think it's going to be better for us to try to do something to kickstart our marriage again, to kickstart our relationship? Or do you think that it's going to be best for us to get a divorce? And
Yes.
many times the people will really try, not always successfully, but will try
Yes.
to reinvent the marriage and re-fall in love.
Yes, and to fight for it, not with each other, to fight for the marriage. I always tell people when they come to marriage counseling, I'm not here to take either side. I'm here on the side of the marriage. I'm trying to facilitate you staying together. If not, then we'll visit that at a different time. And I noticed something in you today, speaking of mirror neurons, and sometimes I put these on YouTube, but mostly people will hear this on a podcast. You leaned in, and that's a beautiful thing, because you're not getting paid for this, and I'm not getting paid for this. We have a passion for this. So I want to know, my passion comes from, I've been through a divorce too. I've been through narcissistic abuse. I have a passion to help people. Please, you don't have to reenact anything. I'm a psychiatrist child. That's like being a preacher's kid. We're not allowed to have feelings. We're not allowed to express. And I go, well, I'm breaking that barrier down, and I'm opening a podcast. And no offense to anybody in that profession, but in the old school profession, psychiatrist kids were not allowed to have any issues, any problems. Can't get a divorce. You live like that. So I want to hear, you have the last words today, where your passion comes from, and how you can help people through your passion, what you do this for, because it isn't for financial gain. It isn't. We both have a passion to share our story so no one else has to hurt. That's where I come from. Explain where you come from.
Well, I've always been someone who's been a caregiver, and a nurturer. I'm the middle of 7 children, and they called me Switzerland because I never really got involved in the arguments between, oh, I beg your pardon, the younger kids and the older kids. I always tried to make peace. And my passion comes from, I think, 10 years ago, a young man, I think I shared this with you earlier, came to my office for his divorce. And I came to find out, he asked me if I remembered him, and I said no. And he said, you were the lawyer, my mother's lawyer, when my father was suing her for custody of me. And I remembered you. And I thought to myself, the cycle continues.
Wow.
I mean, and I think we both know that from our various experiences and our professions, that children of divorce have a much higher rate of divorce than children who are coming from intact
And
families.
sometimes at the very same age their parents got a divorce. They're starting to look in the epigenetics of all this now. There's
Exactly.
markers in the DNA for things. Why this is cutting edge stuff we're talking about here. But
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, but obviously you're a therapist and you're very highly educated. I've seen too much heartache in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want it to stop. I know it's impossible. I know it's impossible, but people have been telling me I couldn't do things my whole life. So what can I tell you? You know what I mean? I've never listened to anyone.
Because this is discovery and recovery, anybody out there who has bought into that inner critic that someone else planted in your head, obviously Nancy and I were born with some resilient bone, because that's also neuroscientific. You're either born that way or not, but you can learn it. The good news is you can. So if somebody tells you can't do something, would you please listen to the two of us? Because it's called reactance formation. You go, I'll show you. I'll show you. It keeps us autonomous. So Nancy and I have it. And if someone tells you you can't do something and you really know you're meant to do it and to help other people, just do it, right? Just do it. Reinvent yourself. Because I always said the worst tormentors are some of your best mentors.
Oh, absolutely.
They really are. Just
absolutely.
Like the law firm that said, well, you're a girl. You have to do it. But my first job out of college, I worked for KISS for 3 years. I was a lighting design major in my undergraduate at lighting and sound, which is why I said podcasts are just natural for me. I already know how to use the equipment, and I was a songwriter. But I came down the ladder And this road manager, I didn't know he was a road manager for KISS. I was working on another show. I just put myself through school as a stagehand because my father disowned me for being a theater major. And so long story short, he said, I've never seen a chick work that hard. My answer was not to prickle. I just had learned that I'm in a big boy place. I'm in a man's profession, and diplomacy and civility are key. So my answer back to him was, thank you, sir. I'm sure you meant that as a compliment. And I didn't say it snarkily or anything. I just went on my merry way. And 2 weeks later, I went from being a poor college student to doing makeup and wardrobe for KISS. Now, mind you, I didn't even sew. And they did to me what they did to you. I said, I'm a lighting design major. Why are you hiring me to do this? And they said, because you're a chick. And I went, oh, yeah, I forgot. But I went up the ladder from there and met people who knew people who knew people. When you're reinventing, be it from a nurse to an attorney, from a stagehand to a musician to a therapist, from anything you want to be, sometimes adversity is your best friend. And you can attest to that, can't you, Nancy?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's such sage advice.
Yes. So thank you. Final words from you, what you want to impart. Something will hit you at the end, and I want to hear it.
I think when you're in a situation where you are faced with a narcissist on the other side, the person who cares the least controls the most. And when you stand back and you don't react to a narcissist, they don't know what to do with it. And I call it paradoxal behavior because they're
Yes.
not expecting that.
No.
They're expecting you to overreact or do whatever. And I've told so many people this, and I've used it in my own life, because you talk about narcissists. I was married to the poster boy of narcissism. I beg your pardon. In any event, the person who cares the least controls the most. And in a situation where you really feel yourself revving up, the tears are going to come. You're just, you're searching for the right word to cut them down. Don't
Walk away.
The person who cares the least controls the most. And the
Remember
only
that. The person who cares the least controls the most.
Correct.
Remember that, whoever's out there. Yeah.
And also the other thing, as you mentioned that earlier, I've told so many clients, my own children, if you're in a situation where you're not getting the love, the appreciation, the consideration that you really feel that you need, and you keep accepting it and accepting it and accepting it, you're like you're in McDonald's banging on the counter asking for a steak, and you're not going to get a steak. You're the one who's going to look like the fool. You're the one who's going to look like the person who has a mental illness, because you're in freaking McDonald's looking for a steak.
Exactly.
So you either have to say to yourself, I'm going to be satisfied with hamburger, or move over and go to a different restaurant.
Yes, go to Ruth's Chris or wherever you eat steak, wherever you like to go. You just make it yourself at home. But yes, that's so beautifully put. So beautifully put. So tell us again where we can reach you, find you. Do you ever do coaching? Do you do anything like that?
I do coaching. I am right now, I've limited the people that I can help because I'm spreading myself too thin.
Oh, exactly.
I'm trying to promote this book, which, they don't really do anything to promote it,
not any. Well, and even if you're with a major right now, it's we have to use social media. It is, I call it the conundrum, because I'm a closet introvert. I'm an ambivert, actually. So yes, we have to do our own marketing, and it just, I don't enjoy it. But yes, so the book is Around Which All Things Bend.
And it is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and anywhere books are sold. You can read the reviews on Amazon. I have to tell you, I was shocked.
They're great reviews. I read them. They're amazing. So good. Jack Canfield, you have some really heavy hitters there.
And I really, Jack Canfield, Chicken Soup for the Soul, gave me a very good review. I really am surprised at how many people really got what the book is about. So many of the reviews mention the psychology, and mention that they understand things they never understood before.
Mhm.
And I think it really will help a number of people, especially children who have been deprived of a parent. And I don't mean by the loss through death. I mean aggressively,
Yes.
aggressively prevented from having a relationship with another parent.
Mhm.
There's a lot of information in there, but it's in
And
a
it's a
novel.
novel.
It's
And
a
it's a
novel.
novel. And the new thing, because all authors work on something new. You're working on that malnourished marriage. So look out for Nancy Perpall, because there's books, and even though something's a hybrid publishing, my goodness, Lisa Romano's made millions of dollars off her codependency books, and she published it herself.
Oh,
So
wow.
when you touch a nerve, we use the internet, can be used for good or evil. It depends. It's kind of like depends on who's its hands in. I am so appreciative to have met you and to help people today, because we both have a passion for that. It's not just about the books we write. We write them because it's a lot of work to write a book, everyone. You heard her talk about editing earlier. I don't know how many edits I've done because I never stop. Even after it's printed, I don't stop. It's an awful feeling. So she's sharing with you what she's been through. I've been through a divorce too. We're sharing this out of compassion, not just a passion, but compassion, meaning of like passion. So anybody out there who's suffering or struggling, you can reinvent. It is not the end of your life. A divorce can sometimes be the beginning of your life.
Absolutely.
So thank you for
Absolutely.
sharing with us.
And don't be better. Don't be bitter. Be better.
Beautiful. Thank you. And have a lovely, lovely time promoting your book, because it's really good. It's excellent.
Thank you
The
so
reviews
much
are
for the
excellent.
invite. It's so appreciated. And I hope your audience can get something out of this,
Oh,
because
I'm sure they have. And I appreciate you being with me. I heard a lot of reinvention stories in here today, and that's what we're pretty dedicated to. And narcissistic abuse is one of the biggest things we talk about. It is always the thing that gets the most response. So thank you for talking about that. People really need help there.
thank you so much.
Thank you.